and for people. So there is a European Parliament which is based in Brussels, when in fact there are two, because there's also one in Strasbourg in eastern France. This is one of the contentious issues about it. There's a bit of wastage. There's no need for two. But the French are insistent on keeping the second one in Strasbourg, even though most debates and most of the work goes on in Brussels, the capital of Belgium. So you have people sitting in Brussels in the European Parliament. These are members of the European Parliament. Now you see these posters, actually, as we're driving along here, you can see political posters, candidates campaigning. These are because you have some European elections coming up. So they're all over Europe at the moment. I was in Ireland just the other day, and you had hundreds of them all over the place. So you have in your national parliament, you would have politicians representing each area of your country, and then in the European Parliament you have what are known as MEPs, members of the European Parliament, and they represent their constituents, but in Europe. Now, so they negotiate and come up with rules and regulations for each industry across the board for those members of the European Union. There are now 27 countries that are member states of the EU, and when they come up with these rules and regulations for the industry, they affect each country exactly the same. But what might work, for instance, for a fisherman in the Netherlands might not be so beneficial for fishermen in Greece. However, they have to abide by the same rules and regulations, and then the same goes for someone the automobile manufacturer in Germany, and then one in Spain. Same rules and regulations, but that's across the board. It's kind of almost working like one big country in a sense. But the two big things are you have the free movement of trade and the free movement of people. So it essentially means, in terms of trade, if a company in Germany, where we are now, wants to export some goods to Italy, then they just put it on the back of a truck, put it on a train, put it on a plane, and it goes to Italy. And there's no tariffs you need to pay, no taxes. You literally, it's like it's one big country, just goes across and goes to that person who's bought those goods. And then for the free movement of people, basically anyone who's come to one of the member states can move to another member state without needing to get a visa or anything. So someone in Germany could decide to move to Portugal and literally just get on the plane or drive there, and they would have the right to live and work there. They just need to learn the language or find a job, and that's all very easy. So all those sort of barriers, such as visas and tariffs, have all been taken away, and that really helps, because in some countries you'll have a lack of, or a lot of jobs going that they need to fill, and so you have people from other countries, maybe from poorer countries, who will come over and fill those jobs. Certainly for, when the UK was part of the EU, we have our NHS, our National Health Service, and we used to get a lot of doctors and nurses from abroad, especially Portugal, because Portugal have got a very good health training system, but they would then have quite a lot of their nurses coming over to the UK because they would be better paid. In fact, my son was born by a Greek midwife, so just to give you an example of that. So that's a free movement of people, but it's not all good. You do get a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of red tape. People do complain about how much power the EU has, because you've got to abide by all these rules and regulations. Each country sort of loses a sense, its own power to an extent. One big thing that people have issues is the European Courts of Justice. Now, if you go to court in lose, you can go all the way up to your Supreme Court, and if you lose right at the top, you have one more go. You can appeal to the European Court of Justice, and if they find in your favour, they can actually overrule each country's Supreme Court. They have that power, and that's what you sign up for. Now, that very rarely happens, certainly not on a sort of a personal level. For the public, it does tend to happen. It tends to happen to the government. So, for instance, a government might be taken to court by people in their own country because they feel that they're passing a law potentially or doing something that's wrong, and they'll be taken to court, and then the ECJ will find in favour or find against the government. So that's happened. That's the most common occurrence of that happening. But each person has the right to go all the way to the top and try and get the ruling in their favour, which rarely happens, but sometimes does. So I won't talk to you about Brexit, not unless you want to see a grown man cry. It's a pretty depressing subject for me, we're not in the UK. I mean, you can ask me about it if you want, but that's a whole other topic. Broadly, people are in favour of the EU. It's certainly not perfect. Like I say, there's a lot of red tape, a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of unelected officials. People feel that work in Brussels and pass work on these laws and these regulations and get them passed. People have an issue with that. How it basically funds itself is each country pays a certain amount of money into the European Central Bank according to their GDP, and then the European Central Bank will then pay it out to each country, to various industries in each country. One of the biggest receivers of these funds are farmers. So a lot of farmers get subsidies without which they would not be able to survive. Now, the French are big into this. They love it. The farmers often go on strike in France. Well, to be honest, the French often go on strike. It's a national pastime there. It's all part of DNA. A year without striking would be the apocalypse would be coming. So I'm sure you hear about it all at home when it comes out on the news. They're not worried about smoking things up. But the interesting thing will be when we have the Olympics, whether they do something then, or whether they actually allow the Olympics to go ahead smoothly. I kind of feel you might get a few people who come out to strike. But yeah, just in terms of farming, I mean, a lot of these farmers can get up to 50% of their income from these subsidies. So you might think, well, that's very inefficient. You should really allow them to go bust, but that's just not how it happens here. A lot of farms are small, relatively small here, but the big super farms that you might have in your country. I mean, a friend of mine's a farmer in the UK. He's got he lives in the south of England. He's got a farm that's about 1,000 acres, and it's a decent sized farm. But before he left, he said he did rely quite a lot on these subsidies. But that's because the price of crops, he just wasn't getting as much as necessary it was to make a decent profit. So he's then had to diversify. In fact, he now produces a sparkling white wine, which has become a thing. British sparkling white wine. You wouldn't have thought it was a thing, but it's become very popular. So he's done a few things, but certainly here in France, and you'll also find in Germany as well, you'll have a lot of these farmers relying on these subsidies in order to survive.